We're going to be going for a snowy walk and answering the questions that came in on the YouTube channel. So when I was asking for questions, I didn't expect the level of participation we got. We've got over 100 questions and there's no way I'll get to all of them. But as a thank you, I'm gonna get to as many of them as we possibly can. Check out how snowy it is. It's crazy. This winter has been nuts here. I remember when I was a kid, we used to get snow like this, but it hasn't happened forever. So it's pretty crazy to get this much snow. So we're gonna go find a place to hang out and answer some of these questions. First of all, thank you guys for asking so many questions. I did not expect to get so many. So far we've got 96 questions, and that's in this video being posted for like 18 hours. So thank you guys for that. Okay, so first question is from Colum. He says, will you ever come to Scotland? And the answer is yes, I very much want to go to Scotland. So my heritage is Norwegian and Scottish, and I very much want to go and see where my ancestors are from. And I love me some castles, so yes, Scotland, I just don't know when. Next one is from Alex. He says, how do you market yourself and how do you decide the price to charge for your work? If we're talking portraits and weddings and stuff, you kind of have to look at the market that you're in, look at what other photographers of your same skill range are charging, and then kind of place yourself in that sweet spot. Me personally, I don't like to be the most expensive, but I certainly need to charge enough to where it makes sense. I don't want to give people the impression that there's something wrong with my photography. If you have two products and they're exactly the same and one is significantly cheaper, most people look at that and they say, something's wrong with that. There must be something wrong with that. Why is it so cheap if there's nothing wrong with it? It's called the Walmart mentality. So if you price yourself too cheap, people think that there's something wrong with your photography. So you need to price yourself kind of in that sweet spot. If we're talking about landscape photography and selling prints and stuff like that, what I do is I just take the cost of what that print or what that photo would cost me to print, and then I double it. And it's a very simple way of doing it, but that doesn't really take into consideration how difficult that photo was, how difficult it would be for you to ever get again. If it's one of those one-off things where, you got a tornado over a national landmark of some kind, something really, really special, you need to price it higher because there's no way you're ever going to replicate that photo again, and it should be worth more to you. Okay, next question is from Chance. He says, how do I overcome the feeling of being illegitimate due to having an APS-C sensor and not a full frame? Also, what is the secret to happiness and can I have money? That's funny. The answer to the APS-C versus full frame is it doesn't really matter. Like Brian Pex, my friend on Facebook here, he says the Nikon D500 is as professional as a camera gets, and that's a crop sensor. So it doesn't have so much to do with the crop sensor. It has to do with whether the camera body you are shooting makes sense for what you shoot. So if you're a street photographer, it makes way more sense to be shooting like one of those cute little Fuji cameras that doesn't look like a serious camera, because it puts you under the radar and you're able to get photos that you wouldn't get otherwise with like, a Canon you're shooting like a Canon 1DX with a 300mm lens, you're not going to exactly blend in. You're going to look like a photographer. So you don't want to put yourself in that situation. You got to have the right camera for the right shoot. Just like if you're a wedding photographer, there's a case to be made for needing a full frame camera in that situation because you're shooting in low light situations. Shallow depth of field works to your advantage, and in those cases it makes all the sense in the world to shoot full frame. But if you're shooting outdoor brightly lit sports or wildlife, D500 is an excellent camera. It's as good as you could possibly get. So the most important thing is whether the camera you're shooting makes sense for what you shoot. Ash asks, what are your tips for scouting a location and planning a trip? So the way I scout my locations, I have a video about this, but the way I like to scout my locations is with Google Earth a lot of times. So if I kind of know the general area I'm going, let's say I'm going to Utah, or southern Utah, I will bring it up in Google Maps and then turn on the photos feature. That way I can kind of look at the photos of that general area and get a feel for the lay of the land. And I actually like looking at some of those really low quality cell phone images more than a really professionally shot DSLR shot on 500px, because cell phone shots kind of give you a more realistic view as to what a place actually looks like, because somebody pointed the camera out the window and went click, and that gives you a more realistic rendition of what's actually there than some professionally composed and crafted image with a whole bunch of post-processing. So I like to scout locations with Google Earth, and then I like to get a feel using the photographer's ephemeris to see where the sun's rising, where the sun's setting, what time of day I want to be there, that kind of stuff. And then last, I will take a look at Flickr 500px and see what other people have done in that area. Not so much because I want to steal their compositions, just because I just want to see, what's possible. If I'm shooting an oceanscape, I want to know what the tide looks like, when it's high, when it's low, stuff like that. Woodsea Photography asks, would you class yourself as a professional, and what makes a professional in your opinion? So yeah, I definitely consider myself a professional because I've been, this is how I feed my family. It's the only source of income I have, and it's been that way for about 3 years now. At what stage do you call yourself a professional? I would say it's when your income is generated more by your photography than it is by something else. You don't have to be a full-time photographer, but I think that the moment that photography makes the majority of your money, that's when you become a full-time professional. I kind of feel like full-time and professional are hand in hand. There's lots of amazing photographers out there that are not full-time. They have other gigs, they do it, but are they professionals? A lot of them, that's tough. I guess a lot of them are. Like Ted Gore, for example. He's one of my favorite landscape photographers. And landscape photography is not even his full-time gig, but I definitely consider him a professional because his work is amazing. He was Landscape Photographer of the Year in 2016 or 2015. That's tough, I thought I knew the answer to this, and then now I'm kind of talking myself out of it. So that's kind of an interesting question. I don't know. Jeremy asks, hey Nick, firstly, great vlogs. They're inspiring and informative. My question is, how did you start photography and your business career? And was it your main source of income or your main focus in the beginning? And what advice would you have for those of us that are aiming to do the same thing? I got into photography kind of by accident. I was working my daytime job. I hurt my back really, really bad. I was bedridden for a month and a half of just laying on the couch, couldn't stand, couldn't even walk to the bathroom. I was peeing in jugs and having people make my meals for me because I was completely bedridden. Rather than watching television and rather than watching American Chopper reruns all the time, I decided to do something and try to learn something. So I got on YouTube, actually, and I started watching photography tutorials. I didn't even own a camera. I had a little cheap point and shoot, and I started watching photography tutorials, and I just kind of learned it. I didn't own a camera yet to practice with, but by the time I had my surgery, got out of surgery, bought my first DSLR, I already knew how to shoot manual because I'd been watching tutorials for a month and a half, and it's amazing what you can soak in a month and a half of just all day watching television. And then it just kind of snowballed. I started taking pictures of my kid, started taking pictures of the neighbor's kid. Pretty soon I shot my first wedding, and then just kind of snowballed, and within a year I had to quit my day job because photography had just kind of taken over my life. Biggest advice for people starting off is to completely immerse yourself in whatever it is that you're starting to do. So if it's photography, completely immerse yourself in it. Rather than watching hours and hours of Netflix or an entire season of some stupid show, invest that time into yourself and watch tutorials, learn your craft, and just invest all of that time into yourself. time is really the difference between somebody that's really good and really not, is because somebody that's really good has just taken all that time, all that extra time that we just waste and throw to meaningless, useless things, and dump all of that time into getting better at something, and you will. So that's my biggest advice. Brian Peck says, what mic do you use now? So right now I'm recording with a GoPro Hero 5, which I kind of like. I like some features, I don't like others. And I'm recording with a Rode VideoMic Micro. And it's nice because the audio goes straight into it. And you guys know how many audio issues I've had lately. So it's nice that the audio goes straight into the GoPro. It works okay as long as I'm close. But if I back way up here, the audio just kind of goes away and it sucks. So in those cases, in future videos, I'm going to have a lapel mic. But that's the mic I'm using. Ronnie asks, here's an easy one. What wireless shutter release do I use? I use the Velo wireless shutter release. Radio transmitter one. Put it on the hot shoe of my camera. Plug it into the normal wireless port. And then it has a little antenna and I can stand like a couple 100 feet away and trigger my camera. So it's like pretty cheap too. It's like 40 bucks. Lamar asks, Nick, around how many images do you need to get a successful star trail photo? So for me, like so star trail photos are when you look up, the shot has, the circle of stars in the sky. And me personally, I don't like it when it's a complete circle. It just looks like a big bullseye. It looks kind of weird. I just like to hint at the movement of the stars. So I find usually between like 30 and 60 images are about right. Shoot for an hour or so and you'll get plenty of shots. Combine that all. You're not going to get a full rotation or anything, but you don't need a full rotation in my opinion. Why you asks, have you ever used the Ryonox DCR 250? I have not. I don't even know what that is. Is it a camera? I don't know what that is. Photo Adventures asks, at what point do you think a photographer should feel comfortable and credible enough to sell photography workshops? So being a workshop instructor, there's several things that go into it. It's not all about how good of a photographer you are. It's about how good you are with people, for one, because you definitely have to be a people person to do workshops. So how good you are with people, how good you are at conveying and teaching photography. So, like being able to communicate is a pretty important step in teaching workshops, because if you can't communicate what you're trying to teach, you're not doing anybody any good. That, and you have to have knowledge of the area that you're going to, in my opinion. There's a lot of photographers that teach workshops to places they've never been before, and in those cases you need to be a really good speaker and educator to make that a value for people if you're not also going to be a good photography guide. So how good you are at people, how good you are at teaching and talking photography, and then, how much do you know your stuff, how good of a photographer you are. Because there's lots of amazing photographers, but they're not all great teachers. And you kind of have to be a little bit of both before you should feel comfortable teaching workshops. Yesnia asks, hi Nick, I have a question about the wedding shot that you talked about in Improved Photography Portrait Session, episode number 54. It's the one with the wedding couple in front of the old iconic barn. I want to know if you used high-speed sync for that. No, I did not use high-speed sync for that. So she's talking about this image. I think it's a she. They are talking about this image here. It's just, I believe I have 3 speed lights going. I've got one on I believe it was not a softbox, an umbrella, boomed really close to the couple to give that kind of overhead dramatic light. Got one hitting the barn to illuminate the barn, and then one hitting the couple from the back to kind of give them a little bit of edge lighting. But no high-speed sync. I just cranked up the power on the flashes, and that was enough. Jose asks, I wonder how to make money from landscape photography or time-lapse photography, and how do you earn money with social media? Greetings from Chile. Making money with landscape photography is very tough, and it's getting more difficult all the time. The best way is to sell prints. You can do that in your local area. The next best way is to find people to license them. For example, I shoot for a couple of magazine. It's basically stock photography. It's a company that supplies an array of magazines with images that they might need. They buy images from me a lot of times, like 50 bucks an image, 75 bucks an image. Not a bad deal, but it's not very often. And then for me, workshops are, you know, the way that I make the majority of my money from landscape photography. But you can only do so many workshops a year too, so those are pretty much the main ways. But like I said, workshops should really be reserved for people that are good about talking photography as well as teaching it and knowing their stuff. Mark asks, have I taken a look at the Fuji system? Not really, because it doesn't really match the different types of photography I do. Because I do so many weddings and sports and low light stuff, Fuji just doesn't really appeal to me. I need focus systems, I need good focusing systems, dynamic range, good low light performance. I need good lenses. Fuji's just not on my radar really. And what did I do for a living before photography? I was a golf course greenskeeper. Yeah, I mowed all day long. I sat on a mower all day long. I was working a weed eater. I thought I had the world's best job because I got to be outside and I love golf. Listen to audio podcasts all day long because my job was so mindless and boring and awful. But I didn't know it until I got a much better gig, and now I'm like, man, I can't even imagine doing that now. Abdul Malik Saeed. I think I said it right. Would you recommend the Sony A7 for a entry-level full-frame camera versus a D610 or a Canon 6D? That's tough because once you buy into a system, you're kind of locked into that system. There's kind of some ominous news on the horizon about Nikon, about, you know, their financial well-being and stuff. If I was jumping in and I was a landscape photographer and I shot lots of night stuff, I would jump into Sony stuff just because their low light performance is excellent, dynamic range is through the roof, they have the best sensors. Sony A7, not nearly as good as the A7R II, but at least you're into the Sony camp. And once you start acquiring lenses and stuff, when you do upgrade to the next step, you're gonna have all of that stuff. So I would say Sony for what you're shooting. How do you travel on airplanes with your big tripod? I'm planning a photography specific trip and bringing my big tripod, but I don't know how to do it. So when you're flying on airplanes, there's a couple ways you can do it. If you have a big tripod, one of the ways you can do it if you are okay with the risk is take your ball head off, to put your ball head in your camera bag, which you're going to carry with you as carry-on, and then put the legs section in your checked luggage. And, you know, wrap it in some clothes, and assuming your checked luggage gets to where you're going, you're okay. But if they lose your luggage, you are screwed once you get there, and that happened to several people on the Iceland workshop that I led. Once I bought my expensive Really Right Stuff tripod, I'm no longer okay with putting it in my checked bag because I'm so afraid that they'll lose it and I'll show up to this amazing place with no tripod and that would be awful. So what I do is I just strap it to my camera bag. I take off the ball head, put it in my camera bag, makes it a little shorter, take off those spikes that I use because it makes it look like a weapon, and I strap it to the outside of my camera bag and I have no issues with it. Flown with it 4 times that way and never had an issue. So that's the way I'm flying with them now. Other people have just taken them as a carry-on separate from their camera bag, put it under their seat, and they're okay with it. According to FAA regulations, tripods are considered photographic gear and they do not have to be checked. So, and they don't want the responsibility of checking that because they know how expensive they can be. So just take it on the airplane as checked luggage or carry on. Okay, next question is from Rich. He says, I love your work. I want to move to Oregon. What part are you in? Also, I just got back from Death Valley and it's awesome. So I'm actually not in Oregon. I'm in Eastern Washington on the edge of the Palouse. I actually live in a small town called Dayton, which is right next to a slightly larger town called Walla Walla, Washington, from Bugs Bunny. That's right. So I live next to Walla Walla, Washington. Alberto says, have you ever planned to go on a photography trip to Italy? Yes, I definitely have. have. Italy is one of those other places I desperately want to. Well, first of all, I'm a history nerd, so I want to see Rome and Pompeii and all of the amazing old Roman ruins. But I also want to see the Dolomites. The Dolomites in Italy are amazing. Look up the work of people like Enrico Fossati or Aaron Bobnik. Amazing photographers, a couple of my favorites, and they have lots of work from the Dolomites, so I want to see the Dolomites for sure. David asks, what is a swatchback? I don't know. Almeo asks, hey Nick, keep up the good work. Do you use any geotag solution for your photos? If so, which do you use? I don't really. My Canon 5D Mark IV has GPS, which I normally keep turned off, but that would be the way I would do it. I would just turn GPS on, and then it would geotag every photo I take, and then in Lightroom I can open up the maps feature, boom, there it is. But I don't. A lot of times the GPS functions in cameras, they just suck the batteries dry, and so you kind of have to like shut it off when you turn your camera off or turn it on every time, and I just don't mess with it. I don't care enough about it. Next question is from Ron. I struggle shooting landscapes with dead or leafless trees. They always seem to blend into the background. Is it poor composition or is it something that I'm missing? So one of the things that I always do if I'm trying to shoot dead trees, like if I have a forest scene or I have a lone tree, is you try to simplify the background. Because, you know, if you have, well, we don't really have anything here, but if you have just a barren dead tree, it's going to, and you got more back behind it, it's just going to, they're just going to blend into each other. It's just going to be noise. So what you have to find is a tree that has a clean background, a tree that has either a totally different kind of tree in the background or no trees at all in the background, and it's completely isolated against that background. That, or get down lower and isolate it against the sky, then you have the dark tree against the bright sky. That will work too. But wintertime trees are actually, in my opinion, more photogenic without all of the foliage than they are during the summer when they have all the leaves and stuff, just because it becomes, it's really nice to silhouette against stuff. You know, dead tree silhouettes are really cool. But you have to get it against that clean background. Andrew asks, what is your absolute favorite lens for landscape photography? Easy, 16-35, Canon 16-35 version 3. I know I promised a review about that lens, but I haven't done it yet. But I can tell you that lens is awesome. It is so much better than the version 2 f2.8. Sharp across the corners. The only downside of anything is that it's got a lot of vignetting, but I don't care about that because a lot of times I'm adding vignetting to my landscapes anyways. Who cares about vignetting? It's really sharp. I love that lens, and I use it for most of my stuff. Yao asks, panorama versus ultra wide lens for landscapes. What is your workflow between taking shots and post-processing? Backup, labeling, renaming, selections and stuff. I actually like panoramas. If you have the time and you have the right focal lengths and stuff, shooting a landscape in a panorama, like taking a whole bunch of photos and stitching it together, that's always going to be a better way because you end up with more megapixels to play with. It's also a lot more post-processing because if you have a high dynamic range scene, you have to bracket each one of those shots and then create a virtual copy, and then you have to exposure blend it. So it's a lot more post-processing time, but I think the end result is worth it, especially if you do large prints. The other part of the question was, what is the rest of my workflow like between taking the photo? So I take my photos home, I import into Lightroom. Inside of Lightroom, I have, because I do so many different types of photography, I have one catalog to rule them all and to bind them. I have one catalog, and then inside that catalog I have different folders with the different types of photography I do, and all of those different folders are organized by date. So I'll have landscape photography, and then inside of that I have my 2016 photos, 2015 photos, and so on. A separate folder for the weddings that I shoot that'll be just one folder with the couple's name and stuff. Then I back up using SyncToy because I'm on PC. I will back up that particular hard drive onto a backup hard drive, and then anything from last year I put onto a RAID system that I have that is made by Syntology, and I throw everything on that RAID system, and then it's all just automatically backed up. But anything that I'm currently editing, I have on my internal hard drive. Franklin asks, if I could use only one prime for landscapes, which would it be? I really like that Sigma 20mm. The Sigma 20mm f1.4, excellent lens, very versatile too because you can open it up to f1.4. I feel like that's a pretty versatile focal length. I wouldn't want to go super wide because then you're just stuck with, like, the only thing you're ever going to be taking pictures of is a foreground. You know, 20mm is not quite so wide. If I was shooting on a crop sensor, I'd probably look at the Rokinon. What is it, the Rokinon 14mm, again, because it's not super wide, but it's still pretty wide, and it's a really affordable lens as well. TJ Newell says, any tips for motivation with landscape photography? I live in northern Texas where everything is flat and uninspiring, and the funding for travel looks bleak. Motivation is to look at the work of others. I always say that. And if it's just not in the budget for travel, what is in the budget is keeping a close look at the weather. You know, only go out and shoot when the weather is looking interesting and extreme, because even if you're in a flat landscape, it doesn't take much of a foreground to make, you know, if you're in Texas, to make a really cool monsoon look cool. When you get that dramatic light, everything looks great. Doesn't matter whether you're on flat ground or, you know, rolling hills. So take a close look at the weather and just turn into a weather junkie. Like, go out when the weather is fantastic, because really that's when you're going to get your best photos regardless of where you live. So Alex asks, what is your worst landscape shooting experience? Have you ever ran into animals, bad people, etc.? For those of you that have been to Delicate Arch, you know that it's kind of in this big bowl. There's Delicate Arch over here, and then there's this big bowl. And right here, there was like 75 photographers, like this huge wall of photographers and tourists and stuff, getting set up for sunset waiting. And I go to mount my camera on the tripod. This is a Canon 6D with a 16-35 on it. This is like the second day of a big, you know, 12-day long road trip. And I feel like I got my camera on my tripod. I let go and my camera falls off. And just in slow motion just goes dunk, 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 and rolls all the way down the cliff, completely destroyed. And worse yet, I had a huge audience. I had 75 photographers. They're like, oh, you know, and they're talking the whole way down, and it was awful. So at the very beginning of my trip, I lose my favorite camera, my favorite lens, completely destroyed. And I had to shoot with my backup camera and lenses that just weren't nearly as good. It was awful and expensive. I had no photography gear. It sucked. Okay, so the next question is, the Madman asks, what type of ND filters do I use? I use Breakthrough Photography filters. I've tried a bunch of other ones, and the Breakthrough Photography filters have by far the least color cast, and they're nice and thin. And they also have traction built onto the outside ring of them, which is really nice because you can actually, you know, grip them better. They're just really well made. So well made, in fact, that I reached out to them last week and I was like, you know, I refer everybody I know to your filters. Is there some kind of affiliate program we could get on or something? And they didn't really have that, but they did send me a bunch of stuff, which I'm going to be testing and sharing with you guys, including they're coming out with a square filter system to rival like Lee and Wonder Pana and Format High Tech. They're breaking into that, and they claim that it's more color cast neutral and sharper than those other filters, and it's going to be a little bit more affordable than most of them. So that's cool too. So I use Breakthrough Photography. Phil asks, I would like to know a little bit more of the backstory of my favorite photographer. Find out what makes Nick Page tick. Things like, did you have a previous profession? What was it? How long have you been a professional photographer? Have you always had a love for photography? How hard of a struggle was it to get to the point where you could make a living? And yeah, so I just want to know more about your backstory. So kind of shared a little bit of that. It was tough in the beginning, and the scariest thing in the world was quitting your day job where you have, like, you know, health benefits and you have that steady paycheck. That was so scary to just be like, you know what, I'm just gonna give it a go. Looking back is the best thing I've ever done for myself. I probably make 3 times the amount that I made working for the man, only I get to work for myself now. And the majority of my job is just nerding out about photography and talking about how fun photography is. When I teach workshops, I get to go to really cool places and share my love for photography and just hang out with friends. That it doesn't get any cooler than that. But in the beginning, it wasn't like that at all. You know, before I was on YouTube and before I had podcasts, I was just another photographer. And the hardest part was breaking through and starting to get noticed, and that just comes with time. You just have to chip away at it. I'm always obsessed with trying to be the best photographer in my area or in my genre or whatever. I'm very competitive, and I always want to be the best at what I do, and that really helps me in photography because not all photographers take it nearly as serious as I do. And because of that, I got better very fast because I was living and breathing it and completely immersed in it. And a lot of other people, they just stayed the same, because a lot of other photographers that do it for a living, they're content with just making a living. They're content with just, doing the same photography over and over and over and never really improving. And I'm not that way at all. Like, even though I make a living at it, I want to get better, and because I get bored with what I'm doing. If I'm not improving, I get really bored. The fun part is looking back and seeing that you've gotten better and trying to do something new. Otherwise, what's the point, So the competitive aspect of my personality really helped me break through. But it was very scary in the beginning. Stacy asks, 11 to 24 or 16 to 35? You mentioned that you like the 16 to 35 better. Do you still feel that way? So yes, I still feel that way. I feel like the 11 to 24 is an excellent lens, but it's huge. It doesn't have a huge focal range, meaning, you're not, 24 just doesn't feel like you zoomed in very much from 11. It is really wide. It's a very, very unique look, but it's big, it's heavy, and the 16 to 35 just feels like a much more versatile lens. I can use filters on it more easily. In my opinion, it's just as sharp, maybe a touch sharper. Performs great at night in low light because it's an f2.8. That 16 to 35 is a really decent focal zoom range. You feel like you've zoomed in significantly when you zoom into 35 millimeters. Beard care. Andrew asks, beard care. That's it. No, I don't care for it nearly as much as I should. You guys know from watching my videos, it's always pretty damn ragged. I have bad hair days. Like, some people have bad hair days. I have bad beard days. It's kind of long and unkempt. And after a really fresh shower, it's like this much longer than it is normally, but I don't care for it as much as I should. I try to keep it symmetrical, and even that's a challenge. Don't try this at home, kids. James asks, do you always manually focus when shooting landscapes? I know you have the 16 to 35 and the 70 to 300, but do you use a lens that's in between those focal lengths? No, I don't always manually focus when I'm shooting landscapes. The Canon 5D Mark IV is so much better at focusing in live view that I'm pretty much just focusing that way. I just pick my spot, focus really quick, it's instant, and I can't ever get it better manually focused than it can do, assuming that the light levels are high enough. When it starts getting dark, that's when I start manually focusing. Am I shooting with a lens between the 16 to 35 and the 70 to 300? Most times, no. Most times my travel kit, even no matter how far I'm traveling, I travel with the 16 to 35 and the 70 to 300. If I think I'm gonna be shooting some low light, I will take a 24 millimeter f1.4 because I really like shooting the night sky with that lens. But if I feel like I need a focal length that is in between that 35 and the 70, I will just shoot a panorama with the 70 millimeter. I'll end up with more megapixels than if I would have shot it with, a 50 millimeter. And I'm only packing 2 lenses, and my bag's light and nice, and it's compact and just easy. The downside to that is that if I drop my 16 to 35 down a cliff, I am really out of luck. That would really suck. So that's the risk that I'm taking. Randy asks, I know you recommend Really Right Stuff tripods. What tripod do you recommend if I can't talk myself into that price tag? I want a really lightweight tripod. I enjoy photography and I like to spend my money on good gear, but the Really Right Stuff is expensive. Yeah, the Really Right Stuff tripod is not for everybody. If you're looking for a really good lightweight tripod, I still recommend Feisal, but I recommend the 3442 Tournament tripod. I've heard of no issues with that particular line of tripod, and it is really, really light. You're not gonna get a more sturdy yet light setup. If you don't want to do Feisal, then I would go with Enduro. Enduro has quite a few different carbon fiber tripods. The Stealth series is really nice. Just try to get something without that center column. Dana asks, I've never seen you use a Nautilus slide. Do you find that it's not necessary? I know your images look great. I don't even own a Nautilus slide. Nautilus slides are for shooting panoramas to compensate for the parallax effect, which is nerd talk for when you're shooting a panorama, your foreground doesn't look right because it just doesn't look right. As you move your camera, the foreground kind of shifts. And the only time that a panorama won't work when you're shooting without a Nautilus slide is if your foreground is really, really close. And in which case you're going to get some strange ghosting effects in your foreground, but that's very seldom the case for me. I've never had any kind of issues. Because I'm shooting with an L bracket, I find that the parallax point is, or that nodal point is close enough to where I never run into issues. I've never had a panorama that was just like, oh, that's just not gonna work. I've never had it. So it's more gear, it's more setup, it's more money. I don't care to spend it. So nope, don't even own one, never needed one. All right, guys, I'm getting cold. I think that's about as many questions as we can answer this time. We'll do this several more times, so if I didn't get to your question, I'm sorry, but we're already at like 40 minutes, so this is probably plenty of Q&A for this week. Leave a question in the comments below if you have a question that I didn't get to that is really eating at you, and we'll do this again in the future. Thank you guys so much for your support on this channel. It's nuts that I'm known more for my videos than my photos, but thank you guys so much for your support, and we'll see you on the next video, adventure, whatever it happens to be. All right, thank you guys. Bye-bye.